Okay. Okay, folks, good morning, and thank you for joining us on this webinar. For those of you that are new to our grant program, the webinar is intended to guide you through the various templates and reporting forms that you'll be sending to us on a quarterly basis for the next 18 months, I think. And then for those of you that have an existing grant with us, this is really just a refresher course in what's required, why we require it, when we require it, and an opportunity to ask questions. We've built in opportunities to ask questions in two parts. So we'll have a long part about reporting, then we'll take a brief break and allow for some Q&A, and then we'll talk about reimbursement requests and then have another opportunity at the end. We've scheduled this for 75 minutes. Obviously, if we can keep it shorter, we will. With me today is Amelia Oliver, also with California ReLeaf. She's been working with me a lot, especially in the last several months, on the reports and on tracking invoices. She's responsible for streamlining the worksheets that all of you have for tracking expenses. And she'll be talking about the reimbursement requests. And then also remotely in Seattle, we have Kalaine Rabden, who is the founder and president of Urban Ecos. And she is responsible for calculating all your GHGs after you have efficiently mapped the trees and sent us that data. So she's a big part of this as well. We're really not going to spend a whole lot more time on introductions and just try to get into this since we do have a long agenda. I think probably the first piece that I'm going to want to cover here, provided I can move the slide, which appears to be a challenge right now. Here we go. Is however simplistic this may seem, this is a piece that we really need to focus on a bit, which is the due date. And there has been some challenge in this for the new grantees. I think I've mentioned to you in the forms that I've sent you that the quarterly reports are due on the 10th day after each quarter. That'll be April 10th for everyone that's on the webinar right now. And you'll see that I'm really stressing the 10th for a variety of reasons. The biggest being is that this one has been a little tougher for a lot of groups to adhere to. And I wanted to just provide a little context of why we do really stress getting the reports in on time on the 10th. And it's that we want to get you paid. And so the challenge by having reports coming in late is that we are not in a position to submit our reports to CAL FIRE as they come in. We have to submit all reports to CAL FIRE by the last day of the month in order for us to be able to take that piece of the reporting off our docket and then move forward in providing payments to groups. In order to be able to do that in a timely and efficient manner, we need to be 100% sure that what we're submitting to CAL FIRE is going to pass their test of what qualifies as an reimbursable expense, that the trees are adequately calculated. If they come back to us and say, we need to make corrections, that trickles down and that delays payment. So that's why we're so meticulous in making sure that all the information we provide to CAL FIRE is accurate. And as you can see with the number one piece here is that if one group is late, then everybody is late. And the last quarter was a really good example of that, where I got the final pieces of reports in from some grantees on January 29th. And this was due January 31st. So if we had got in some of those pieces, say mid-January, and every other progress report had been completed, then we would have been able to submit that much sooner, which means we can pay you that much sooner. Also, as some of you may know, the state government has gone through kind of a new reporting process and how they do reimbursements. It has extended the amount of time that it takes them to get payments back to us, or back to everyone. And so we're working with that as well. And that's why you've seen payments that once took maybe 3 weeks are now taking 5, 6 weeks or more, because of the changeover that the entire state government has done in how they're processing payments and reimbursements. So really important to focus on this. I know it seems like we're spending maybe too much time on it, but this is kind of the critical first step to accurate reporting is timely reporting. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. wanted to reinforce that just out of the gate. So we're going to talk about progress reports. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. One of the things that we see in the progress reports is one of two things: not enough information or too much information. And I recognize that it can be difficult to strike that balance, but I can absolutely tell you that too little information is when a response is less than a sentence. And then too much information is, probably when you've filled up the page on additional information, which is one of the questions asked. We are looking for you to capture the essence of what was done in that quarter, but we don't want you to get bogged down in paperwork. That's not the focus point of this grant. So striking that balance, and of course we're happy to provide some technical assistance there, and then we'll go through these other pieces regarding corresponding data and census tract, but I just wanted to highlight that immediately. So what every progress report needs, and progress reports are divided up into the report itself and then the reimbursement request. The report is mandatory. These are required every quarter, even if no work was performed. Obviously, if no work was performed, these are going to be pretty short progress reports where a sentence in some sections will do. We didn't plant many trees. Okay. Something like that is completely acceptable. But we still need the progress report. And then if you did plant trees, we still need the tree planting spreadsheet. And this is an important point that I think Colleen will talk about later on, is that some of the documents that we gave you, which everyone should receive them yesterday if you didn't already have them, it's fine to send those back to us in a PDF form or a JPEG, but whatever works for your organization. There are a couple of documents where we need them back in Excel because we need to be able to import that data, and the tree planting spreadsheet is one of those, and Amelia will talk about a couple others later on. And then the other thing here is that we do need hard copies. Even if this is a fairly thin report where it's just a couple of pages, we didn't really do much, send us the hard copies. You can just put them in snail mail, postmark it by the 10th of each month. But there's really not much that's involved in what's required every quarter, which is the actual progress report. And so let's talk about that a little bit more. This is the progress report PDF fillable form. And one of the things that we wanted to just immediately highlight is that some of the reports that have come in the past, we get a little bit caught in terms of the numbers matching from this report to the reimbursement request to the receipt reporting form. And so we just want to note here that you really want to make sure that before you turn this in, that your numbers that you've said here, the funds that you've expended, the match funds, et cetera, that they match what's on your reimbursement request as well. If they don't match, then obviously there's a discrepancy that's going to need to be fixed. And then also down here, same thing when it comes to the trees. A semi-common error will be mentioning that, say, 19 trees were planted this quarter for a total of 57 trees to date, and then the tree tracking sheet that you'll send in that we provide to claim will show 23 trees. So again, if there's that discrepancy, something needs to be changed. Either the tree tracking form needs to be adjusted to reflect the actual amount of trees that were planted, or the PDF form needs to reflect what's on the tree tracking form. So saving yourself that time at the go-between and by matching up those numbers is going to be really helpful. Let's go forward to the census tract area. And for the new grantees, I know you're on CalEnviro screen 3 and the AB 1550 maps, and the questions I think even framed a little different on your form, but it still comes down to making sure that you're using the 10-digit census tract information here, because that's what we're reporting to CAL FIRE. And if that's not what's captured here, I need to come back to you and ask you to fill that in, or I need to go look it up. And I'm going to be less familiar with your geography than you are. So that's a pretty simple thing to just be able to make sure that you're including in the report, rather than kind of shorthand or just using the local data that you may have tracked, which I think is closer to 6 digits. Make sure you do the full 10-digit census tract. Photos, we just wanted to talk a little bit about this. First, kind of alleviate some confusion in terms of some questions folks have had about, do we need to submit full color photos for every quarter for every shot that we took that we're submitting? Absolutely not. We realize there's a cost involved there. it's a little bit redundant because what we care about first and foremost is having a good digital quality photo that we can share online, that we can put in other reports. So that's the focal point. If you want to submit one or two of your favorite pictures from that quarter in the hard copy, that's great. It's just something that CAL FIRE sees. So I would encourage you to do that, but certainly don't go beyond that and just submit the photos that are pertinent to that quarter electronically. JPEGs or TIFFs absolutely will work. You can see what we're looking for is quality resolution. And I've had questions about the photos before, just some key points about why we want to have the photos demonstrating the progress. We really like to tell a lot of stories about how these projects are progressing, stories that we share with decision makers, stories that we share with our board, stories that we share with CAL FIRE, and showing these pictures and how they connect community and are advancing the goal of the program is really valuable. And of course, before and after photos are always great. We're using those right now to demonstrate to decision makers at the state capitol the value of supporting funding for eradicating the shot hole borer. So they really can be impactful. So just encourage you to include photos each quarter to the extent possible, or to the extent that you did take pictures. Obviously, if you didn't do much work in a particular quarter, you're going to have less photos. Moving on to there. That is really all I have to say about the progress reports. It is what I think to be kind of the easiest part of the whole package, which is just telling the story of what you did that quarter and making sure that your numbers match. After that, we get into something that's a little more complex that I think Colleen's going to go through in detail, which is tree tracking, and then, of course, reimbursement requests. So I'm going to actually give control over to Colleen to talk a little more about the tree tracking. Colleen, do you have the mouse?
It looks like I do. Thanks, Chuck, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Let's see if I can make it go forward. No. Chuck, I think you're still wiggling your mouse, and that takes it back.
Yeah, you are absolutely
right. Your arrow was dancing around. Let's see. Well, this part is always a difficult part. Can you see, is my mouse? There we go.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So basically what I'm going to cover here today is this form, which has in its spreadsheet title the MDCA. That's what CAL FIRE calls it. And it includes all of the information that we need both to report to them and that I also use to calculate the greenhouse gas reductions of your project. So I'm going to go through it bit by bit because it's pretty simple looking, but it ends up being pretty complicated in its process. And I've mentioned this before. My slides normally I have a rule about having words on slides, but here I've tried to make this as wordy as possible so that you can come back to it and use it as a manual if you want. And of course, we are recording this presentation, so you can also come back and just listen to the whole thing again if you have any problems. But hopefully this will serve you as a sort of manual to follow along with. If you are here for an urban forest management grant, you have a form that looks like the one that I'm showing here, where the greenhouse gas benefits from shading section is purple. If you have a forest inventory grant, your form is yellow in that section. And they're almost exactly the same, except for the part that relates to the DAC status. I know we have a few forest improvement folks on the call, so I've included a couple of extra slides, even though this presentation is really targeted at the newer urban forest management grants. But that's a difference that you'll see between these two. So you want to start on in this spreadsheet, this MDCA spreadsheet. If you've got the urban forest management grant, you should start with the README tab that I'm showing down here at the bottom. And it has all of the instructions on how to fill out the form. And perhaps the most important part of this is this section here that's highlighted in red now, the DAC status. So this is where these two grants differ. And I'm going to show you in a few slides from that later from here how you figure out your DAC status based on what kind of grant you have. But this is a critical part of the instructions to understand and how these two differ. Especially, let me say, if some of you have both of those kinds of grants, you'll find that these are just a little bit different. And if you have a forest improvement grant, here is your instructions sheet. This one's actually called instructions, which is helpful. And here's your little section on the DAC status and how these two are different. So go ahead and start with the instructions whenever you have a question. I've tried my best to make the information there complete. So the first thing that you want to do that I see mistakes happening is you want to make sure you're entering the data into the correct quarter. So one thing I've tried to do this time around is to add a tab for every quarter of the project, so that you don't have to worry about creating new tabs for yourself. If you don't have a tab for the quarter that you're reporting, just send your file back to me and I'll fix it for you. So start with the correct quarter. One thing I didn't make a slide here, but I would also like to say, I say it again at the end, is please, for my sake and yours, practice good file naming etiquette. So there are about, I don't know, 25 or 30 grantees now that every quarter I'm doing the calculations for, and sometimes I have more than one file open on my desktop, and it's called tree list. And it's very helpful to me if the name of the file says something like Tree Huggers LLC _ first quarter 2020 _ MDCA, so that I know when I look at the file name who I'm talking to, which one I'm looking at. And I can't rename them because there's been plenty of times where I've had to go back and say, hey, the file that you sent me called tree list has this problem with it. So I need to keep your name, but I'm really grateful if you can name it in a way that helps us keep them all straight. Okay, so going through this form bit by bit. In the top section there is where we ask for the grant number that's California ReLeaf has given you, your name, and then the reporting date. Again, this is almost never filled in, so if your file is called tree list and you haven't put your grantee name, it's always tricky for me to figure out again which one I'm looking at. So this is helpful, and this has to, unfortunately, has to be redone every quarter because of the layout of this form. Number 2, this section with its blue and green, planted trees from the reporting period and planted trees to date, those things are calculated automatically based on formulas that take into account the information in the main part of the form. If you have an urban forest management grant, it should be set up so that if you're entering data into the right quarter, all of this happens automatically. So as long as you follow the instructions for how to fill out the bottom, these things should happen automatically. And if you think back to Chuck's slide a few slides ago, or the progress report where it said, please enter into that PDF narrative progress report the number of trees planted for this reporting period and the trees planted to date, you should be able to pull them right from this section. And then you know that they match, because as Chuck mentioned, I'd say a third of the time the numbers on this sheet do not match the numbers that are reported. And so there's some problem there. They do have to match. All right, so moving down to the main part of the form, the first column is the tree number. Please make this tree number unique for the entire project inventory. Even better is if it's unique for your entire tree inventory for all the grants you've ever applied for and ever had. There's really no reason why you can't just have a unique tree number. And this allows us to have a conversation in the future where I say, hey, tree number 476E does not have a species. Can you tell me which one it is? And what's happening a lot is people are renumbering them every quarter, or just numbering them 1 through 25 every quarter. And then if I say tree number 23, you don't know which quarter we're talking about. So I'm going to be pretty strict about this in the future because it's caused so many problems. A lot of people are choosing sort of maybe an abbreviation that represents the area that the tree is being planted in, and then a number, or you could just carefully use numbers but make sure that they don't repeat. If for some reason in the future you go back and delete a tree, say you delete tree number 673, please do not renumber them all, so that we want just 673 to be missing, and then you can say to me, I deleted this tree. Okay, the column for the funder, there's a drop-down menu there, and the choices are either CAL FIRE or match. And that's actually what populates that thing that's calculating the total number of trees. So it's got to be either CAL FIRE or match in order for the numbers to add up correctly. Because these trees are, of course, in your mind, these trees are being funded by California ReLeaf, but the money is originally coming from CAL FIRE, and this allows them to pull your data into their larger forms and keep track of the 100,000 trees that have been planted in these grants so far. The next column is the scientific name, which is the genus, the species, and if there's a cultivar, you can include that. Please don't include the common name. Again, we've had the same kind of problems that common names always lead to, which is that there are a couple of species with the same common name. And without the scientific name, I'm not sure which one that you're talking about. We have to go back to figure it out. The next one is the street address, straightforward. Next one, additional information about the address. So maybe it's a park name or a school name, anything you want, but it's certainly fine to leave that field blank if there's nothing that's really relevant. The next one is your city, which should have a drop-down menu, but you can start typing and it should fill in automatically there. All right, scooting over. Number 9, ownership. Again, there's a drop-down menu there, public or private. The vast majority of your trees will probably be public, like if it's in a park, if it's in a school, if it's a street tree. I don't think there are too many projects where trees are being planted on private property, but that is property that is strictly private. So it's a residence, a business, that's basically it. All right, I'm gonna come back to the number 10 and 11 in a minute, but those are the latitude and longitude coordinates. The things that matter are for the y coordinate, it should be a positive number because it's above, because we live above the equator, and it should be, so there are rules set on those columns to make sure that you're entering data that's fitting, that's appropriate. And I'm going to talk more about that in just a few minutes. There are rules about the x coordinate. Number 12 is the census tract. In 2 slides, I'm going to show you where to find that depending on what kind of grant that you have. But as Chuck mentioned before, it should be a 10-digit number, and it should start with a 60 or a 61. And if you filled out this form correctly, you can take the census tract numbers from here and put them into that progress report PDF that Chuck talked about. This is the best source for that information. All right, scooting over one more. The DAC status is the next column. If you have an urban forest management grant, then you have one set of DAC statuses. And again, you can turn to that README tab to show you where to get the information and what they stand for. But basically, your choices, if you have an urban forest management grant, are 1A, which means it's within a disadvantaged community, 1B, it's within a low-income census tract, both of them, or so 1A plus 1B, or 1C, which is it's within a half mile of something that is both a DAC and a low-income community. If you have a forest improvement grant, your drop-down options are different. And there's a tab in your forest improvement grant that's called DAC guidance that will help you figure out which one is which. But your possible values include things like 1A, 2A, 2B, etc. We've seen a lot of people entering numbers here like 85 to 89%. And in the next slide, I'll show you where they're getting that from. But that is not the number that we're looking for here. We want these codes that are specified by CAL FIRE and ARB. The next column over is the date planted. That's pretty straightforward. The stock size also has a drop-down menu, and it should be something that reflects the size of the container that the tree is planted in. It's not asking you for the diameter of the tree trunk, which is how we normally measure trees. So your options almost certainly are 5-gallon or 15-gallon. The vast majority of our trees that we plant in these projects will probably be 15-gallon. The grow space column reflects the size of the planting space that you're putting the tree in. And basically, CAL FIRE's rule is that trees are not supposed to be going into spaces that are smaller than 24 square feet. So there's a lot of options for what you can enter in this space. If you're planting a tree in a cutout in the sidewalk, you could put the square feet, you could put 4 feet by 6 feet, something like that. If you're planting a tree in a median, so a long strip that goes on for a long way but has a sort of delimited width, then maybe you say it's a 12-foot median, meaning it's 12 feet wide, but it goes on for a long way and we don't really care how far. It's essentially, the trees are essentially unrestricted in their growth. If you're planting it into a park or a lawn, you can just write open, meaning there's no restrictions on the root growth of the trees. It's just a big space. And finally, the tree status. You can choose from the drop-down menu there. It's a new tree that you just planted this quarter. It's a replacement tree for something that died previously. And if you plant something as a replacement tree, ideally you would go back to the previous quarter and mark that tree as dead. So those are the three options there. We're trying, this has been a bit of a data collection challenge for us, but one of the things we very much need to know at the end of the project is basically how many trees are there in the ground and are still alive. So trying to keep track of which ones are replacements and which ones are dead is it's a new process we're trying, and hopefully we'll get some good information this time around. So I mentioned the census tract and the DAC low income status. If you have an urban forest management grant, so that's the most of you on this call, the website here at the bottom of the page is what you're looking for. And again, that link is actually in that README tab that gives the instructions. And you're looking for the priority population maps. You just enter an address into that little address box here. And then a dot will appear at that address, and you click on the dot and this little pop-up window opens, and it tells you the census tract, which you can cut and paste. And then it tells you whether it's a disadvantaged community or a low-income community. Basically, it tells you everything that you need to know, except one thing, and that is one of the options for DAC LI status in this grant is within a half a mile of an area that is both DAC and LI. So in order to figure that out, you just need to zoom your map out a little bit, and I'm going to tell you eyeball it. If it's within 5 or 6 blocks, it's probably that's good enough to qualify as within a half mile of the DAC low income status. And I think that was the final option, which was 1C. But this is where you get all of that information. If you have a forest improvement grant, then and I made a mistake. Whoop, did I lose that slide? Hang on 1 second. Oh, no, I didn't. I just clicked too far. If you have a forest improvement grant, I've captured unfortunately the wrong map here. You should be looking at the CalEnviroScreen 2.0 map, and that is properly linked on that instructions tab for you. But you do the same process here. You just go up here to this little box, type in your address. It's going to put a dot on the map. You click on the dot, and you get your census tract is here, and your percentile is here. So Chuck, can you chime in? I never can remember this. What are the percentiles that qualify as DAC for these grants?
It's up to 75 so it's 76 through 100, and that is
okay, so,
for 2.0. That is a common mistake that some folks make. We've had applications where they'll say they're in the 75 percentile, and in fact they fall into the 71 to 75, but it is only 76 and above, which on this map can get a little tricky because you can see that the color coding, and this applies to CalEnviroScreen 2.0 as well, goes by 10 points, so 71 to 80. So you need to do what Colleen has done here is dig a little deeper to find where you actually fall in the percentile by mapping the coordinates.
Yeah, those colors are actually hard to distinguish anyway on the screen. So you click on your dot and you'll see your census tract there at the top, and then you're looking for this percentile, and it needs to be 76% or above to qualify as a DAC. And again, there is the same half mile rule. It's just applied slightly differently. But again, you can zoom out your map a little bit, get a little bit more context. And if you're within a half a mile, that is one of the categories of DAC status that is worth tracking. Okay. So finally, if your trees are planted within 60 feet of a building, then they possibly qualify for some greenhouse gas benefits associated with building shade. So if we plant trees to shade buildings, it reduces our need for electricity in those buildings to cool them. That reduces the production of greenhouse gases at the power plant level, which actually can be a pretty substantial contribution. So if you're planting trees within 60 feet of buildings, so if you're planting them in a park, probably not, but if you're planting them as street trees or even around schools, things like that, this can be really helpful information. And you can plug it in here, and in a few slides, I'm going to show you how to figure it out. But basically, there's a drop-down menu here too with categories, and all we really care about in this instance is, are the trees 0 to 20, 20 to 40, or 40 to 60 feet from a building. If they're 60 plus feet, you can either choose that or you can just leave it blank because it doesn't matter. If they're within 60 feet, the second thing that we need to know is what direction it is from the tree to the building, because a tree planted to the west side of a building is going to do a lot more to block that hot summer sun than a tree that's planted to the north of the building, which is not actually shading the building at all. And because this is a little bit tricky, I always formulate this as a sentence because it's hard to know which direction you're talking about. So I always just say the tree is to the blank of the building, and you get, again, to choose from a drop-down list of the 8 cardinal directions. So this is just an example of what that form would look like once you've filled it all out with some example data. So digging into the more complicated pieces like the latitude and longitude coordinates. So one of the aspects that I said is that it needs to have sufficient digits, it needs to be sufficiently accurate so that we can actually find that tree if we go back out to look for it using the latitude and longitude. And so in this picture in the top, so basically what we need here is actually to have 6 digits after the decimal place. If you see the picture in the top, that is where the tree is actually located. That's shown with those coordinates. If you chop it down to only 4 digits in this bottom picture, so here I've entered these coordinates with 6 digits after the decimal place, and we get the actual location of the tree. If we only have 4 digits after the decimal place, then the tree, which is properly here, is showing up as being at this location instead. It's actually 2 whole houses away in San Francisco terms. So we are looking for 6 digits, please. So how to get the latitude and longitude? There are a couple ways. One is in the field with a GPS device, which basically none of us have anymore because we have smartphone apps. One thing I'm going to say is that you should not use the default compass app on your phone because it does not show the proper amount of accuracy. So this is what the iPhone one looks like. Please do not use this. Now, for those of you who are really very exacting, and you know who you are, I'm going to tell you the honest truth here. The reason that your iPhone compass app only shows 4 digits after the decimal place is because that's actually how accurate the phone is capable of being. CAL FIRE is asking us to be more exact than our phone. So we're going to try to wiggle the data, if you will, in order to make it acceptable. The best way to really get accurate information, I would say, is to draw where you've put your trees on a map that you've printed out and come back to your desk and do it using Google Maps or Google Earth. But we're going to walk through both methods here. So the app that I like for the iPhone is called Commander Compass. I've had a couple of requests for suggestions about Android apps, and because I do not have one myself, or honestly know anybody that has one. The truth is basically any of the highly rated compass apps will be just fine. You just want to make sure that they will show that same level of accuracy, and there's always an option to change the way the data are presented. So I'm going to show you a couple more things here too. So here in the Commander Compass app, if you go under the sort of info tab, you have all of these options of ways of presenting the data. And the one at the bottom here is what we're looking for. So we don't want this degrees north and with the little minutes and the little seconds. We want just plain old number, decimal, and 6 digits. And almost certainly any app that you find is going to have an option to change it like that somewhere within it. So if you're going to do it out in the field, my suggestion is you print out a map like this, draw a picture of where you have planted the trees, and identify. So here, this person has identified the tree species just with 1s and 2s, and they're going to come back to their desk and do it back at home. So if you're going to do this, you have that map that you drew, and you go to Google Maps, and you just zoom into that same location, and then you right-click on the exact tree spot, and choose from, and this little drop-down menu will appear. You click on what's here, and then down at the bottom, the latitude and longitude appears in the box. So it's right down here. So you just click on the spot right here where you planted the tree, and here are your latitude and longitude. Do your best, cut and paste is always my suggestion. Don't try to type it out. It's really easy to make mistakes in that way. So whenever possible, cut and paste rather than typing the numbers out. You can also use Google Earth. And here you're going to just drop a pin in the spot where the tree is, and then the latitude and longitude are showing up. Now I messed up here and I forgot to actually change the way that this is displayed, but in Google Earth it's the same option. There's something called preferences or something like that where you can change the way it's presented and you can actually get the decimal places, which is what we want. So that's how you find your latitude and longitude. Again, you can use your iPhone out in the field, your smartphone out in the field. You can do it with Google Maps or Google Earth at your desk. The next one is the distance and the direction to the building. In this case, right, so again, we're going to measure the distance to the nearest building using those 3 distance categories, noting that if they're more than 60 feet away, we just don't care. I think this one is really easy to measure in the field, which is kind of fun, especially if you're working with volunteers. You can start the day by teaching people their pace, and they can just pace the distance from the building to the tree because it doesn't have to be really that exact. That's a fine way to do it. You can also do it using Google Earth. Now, the direction from the building to the tree is much more difficult to actually do out in the field. So my recommendation in that one is, as I've noted here in 2B, it's really best to do this using a map and not in the field because it's so easy to get this backwards. And the sentence you're trying to fill in, the tree is to the blank of the building. So here's an example. Tree number 245, I've used Google Earth, and it has this little ruler measuring tool. It's 19.4 feet from the building, so it's 0 to 20 feet, and this tree is to the east of the building. Tree number 324 is to the west of the building. So that is basically the process for all of those things. I will take that information that you've presented in that spreadsheet and do the GHG calculations. We've had in the past, in the past this process was a lot more complicated. We've had a lot of people spending a lot of time trying to do their own GHG calculations, and it's easier now. So it's less likely that mistakes will be made, but know that you don't need to do this. It really doesn't do any good. That's what I'm here for. I'm going to do that work for you. That's one load that we can take off of your plate. So please do not feel like you need to do the GHG calculations yourself. If you're interested to know what yours were, you can just drop me a line afterwards at the end of the quarter, and I'll let you know how your trees are doing if you want. Otherwise, we're trying to provide periodic progress reports to folks to show how they're coming along with their trees and their GHGs along the way. So that's another way that you can find out. So next thing, next relevant piece of information for me is about substituting species. So it's been a while now since you filled out your grant application, but in your grant application, you said you were going to plant a certain palette of species and a certain number of trees of each kind. We presented that information to CAL FIRE along with the relevant GHG benefits that went with those trees, and they approved those. If you need to change your species from your original selection or the number of trees allocated to each species, we have to redo the greenhouse gas calculations, and we need CAL FIRE to approve the substitutions. So please, if you want to make changes, we're going to ask that you need to come to us ideally beforehand so that we can make sure that you're doing something that will qualify. We have had a few cases where people planted species that CAL FIRE did not approve, and therefore they end up not getting paid for. So please do check in ahead of time if you need to make some substitutions. And finally, here is my synopsis of recommendations for tree inventory keep records. Like I said, whenever possible, don't have people writing down numbers, use cut and paste. Let people in the field measure the distance from the tree to the building if you'd like, but I suggest using the map to find the direction. This one I should have maybe mentioned earlier. This is one of my personal favorites. If you're using your phone to find the latitude and longitude, make sure you're standing right next to the tree. I've seen so many cases where people are standing a few feet away from the tree, looking at it, and using their phone to get the coordinates, which then are going to be off by however far you are standing away from the tree. So this, you're almost certainly going to do this wrong. Maybe even appoint a person to keep track of it, because it's very easy to make this mistake. And measure the distance and the direction to the nearest building, which might not be the obvious one. So you could be planting a tree in front of one building, but it's actually closer to the one that's across the street. I highly recommend that you practice a few times with your equipment and your data sheets before you get out there in the field, especially if you're working with volunteers, so that you know that everybody knows what they're doing and that the forms make sense and that you've left enough space for things and all of that. And then finally, I just threw this one back in there. Please give your files helpful names so that I can do a better job of keeping them straight when I'm trying to do all of the organizing work. And I think that's it for me. If anybody has any questions, I don't see any questions showing up, but if you've got relevant questions, I think Chuck's idea was that we could tackle those now before we get too far away from the information.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Corinne, and thank you so much for providing all that information. I know it's a fair amount to absorb. This webinar will be available online after we complete this, and it'll come with all the audio as well, so you can review it. And as Colleen said, she intentionally laid hers out so that you'd be able to track that information and go back to it repeatedly. One of the things that I wanted to add to Colleen's recommendations, which is coming more from ReLeaf, is if you can, map your trees shortly after you've planted them, or maybe even when you're doing the planting. I know that especially for the new grantees, this may be kind of a valuable tip, where we have had folks submit a report, their first quarterly report, and they've planted 50 trees, and like, this is great, where's your mapping? And they go, oh, we got to map the trees. And so then having to go map 50 trees when the report was due 2 days prior can be a real burden for you, and then of course it is for us too, because then we need to wait for that until we can provide the data to Colleen. So that's just a suggestion, is that waiting till the end of the quarter to then go map all your trees that were planted, it could create a undue burden for you as a program and grant recipient. So I thought I did see a question here.
Got it.
So we're going to try to find out what it is.
I got it. And so the question is, could you go over the Commander Compass app and how to set the coordinates?
Oh.
I can answer that question quickly, but all the apps are going to be slightly different. In the Commander Compass app, it happens that there is a little there's a little button that's just an I for information. So there's almost certainly on every app going to be something that looks like this. You tap on that I, and in this case, there's an option called settings. So whatever your app is, it's probably going to look something like that. And then in Commander Compass, if you scroll down in that settings section to geo coordinates, coordinate display format, that's where you have your choice of those geographic coordinates. So if you're using a different app and you have an iPhone, you can ask me and I can help you figure out how to change the coordinate presentation. But probably you also could Google something like the name of the app and then coordinate presentation, and you might find an answer for how to do it. Unfortunately, it is tricky when there are so many different options out there.
Thanks, Colleen. And then it looks like we have a question regarding timeliness for reimbursements. I'm going to let folks know exactly what the process is. Then I'm going to turn this over to Amelia to field this question. CAL FIRE allows for advance payments in some circumstances. We cannot allow for advance payments, because if the grantees are not performing per the grant agreement, we're responsible for that. So that's a big difference between CAL FIRE and California ReLeaf. However, what we can do is we can seek advance payment up to 25% of the total grant amount that we can hold in anticipation of the quarterly reports coming in and us processing them and sending them to CAL FIRE. Once we've done that, and as I mentioned earlier, we have the full faith in our staff and in the people that we brought in, such as Colleen, that we've done our job right in working with you to get your quarterly reports accurate. So when these have gone to CAL FIRE, in an ideal circumstance, we have money set aside ready to pay you at that point. Now, I do say in ideal circumstance because, as we discussed, CAL FIRE and other state agencies, all state agencies, have restructured how they're processing reimbursement requests through the government, and that has created delays. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amelia.
Right. Was that all the questions? I just want to make sure.
Well, I think you want to answer this question.
Oh, this particular question? I mean, we would love to pay you when we're all approved. However, our bank account would not allow that. So we cannot pay everybody until we get our reimbursement check from CAL FIRE, which is up to 90 days from the moment that we submit. So this last quarter, because of our delays, we were not able to submit our reimbursement request until February 1. So add 90 days to that, and you can expect a payment before that. So that's the process. Like I said, we would love to pay everyone, but we do not have that amount of money in our bank account to be able to pay how many grantees?
35. We have
35 grantees. I think we owe about 200,000 out to grantees at the end of the quarter.
We do hope that as the state adjusts to this new method that they're doing for processing payments, that'll streamline a little bit going forward over 2020 and 2021 to where we could get to a point where we will have funds held in reserve so that when we do get the quarterly reports done and sent to CAL FIRE, rather than waiting on CAL FIRE, we can pay people. And that would be within a matter of a couple of weeks. And we actually did have periods with previous grants and even some of the people on this call with the force improvement grants where we were able to pay within 3 weeks or a month. It's just, unfortunately, the state delay has a trickle-down effect. I'm going to see if there's any other questions here.
I thought there was one from Mary.
I think Mary was just saying thank you that the information is helpful.
Okay.
So, okay, at this point, we're going to move forward. We're a little more than halfway done. I'm actually going to turn this over to Amelia, who's going to talk about reimbursement requests. So I'm just going to
take my chair.
switch seats here with her.
All right. Hello, this is Amelia. Some of you have talked to me on the phone or see me on site visits, but I'm here to talk about the reimbursement request form. And as Chuck mentioned at the beginning, you're not required to turn in a reimbursement request. If you don't want to get reimbursed, that's fine. You just need to do the quarterly report. But if you anticipate needing those funds, make sure you get your quarterly report in and your reimbursement request in on time. And the most common hurdles we found, we have the supporting documentation for personnel costs. Those are conflicting or hard to read. We have the materials administration costs, again, conflicting or hard to read between your cover sheet and your backup documentation. Match is as important as your direct costs, so make sure that all your backup for your match that you report on your reimbursement request, it has a proper paperwork. Vague and or unclear supporting documentation. If you take a picture of your receipt with your iPhone and you can't read it, we can't read it either. So being sure that everything that you submit is legible for us and for both CAL FIRE and the state finance department. They all go through these as well. It's very important that everything is very clear. Listing your receipts. You bought some Tilia cordata trees. That's great. You bought this many, they cost that much per. That will be shown on your receipt. I need to know where you bought the tree, and the total that you want to be reimbursed for on your receipt form should be by the vendor. So if you bought them at the local nursery, make sure you use the nursery name and the total that you want to be reimbursed for on that receipt list. Personnel charges are personnel charges, and that includes contractors. So if you had augering done by a contractor, that is a personnel cost. Please don't put that under equipment. And miscalculated indirect costs. That goes back to what you wrote on your original budget to us. And if you asked for a 10% in indirect costs, then that's what you've got to do on a quarterly basis. If you didn't include any, then you can't put any in there unless you have a budget adjustment with us. So, and please do not include receipts for indirect costs. They end up being very confusing for us. It should just be an amount in that part of your form. Whatever request needs. There is the workbook in Excel, which we've created here. It's got your budget in it that was approved with your contract, and please do not make any adjustments to that budget. We will make, if you have concerns about your original budget and you need to change it, you would work through Chuck to get that approved. And we never expect you to spend them dollar for dollar, so it zeroes out. So, don't be concerned so much about that. Just be sure that your amount that you're requesting is in the right category so that we can help you out. There is a receipt reporting form. It happens to be Excel. We just really want you to be clear as to who you bought the items from and what category that you're charging it to, and whether it's a direct cost or a match amount. We have the timesheet template, which you use your organization's timesheets, so those numbers should match. Again, so it's clear whether it's direct cost or whether it's a match cost. You need clear documentation for all of the reimbursement requests so that you have receipts, and we also need those for match. You have your line item reimbursement request. Yeah, again, I think I just talked about that. It should not to exceed 10%, but some people, again, didn't put 10% in that line, and you need to match what you asked in your grant. Volunteers, if you're going to use volunteers as match, make sure you have sign-in sheets. We cannot move it forward if it doesn't have the volunteer sign-in sheets with your reimbursement request. And then the 2 hard copies. Here is our timesheet template. Please make sure that you have your organization name at the top, just like Colleen was saying on the tree forms. It's really hard to match things up if we don't know who they're for. The name of the person, their hourly rate, and the direct cost. And this is, here it is by week. And then these totals at the bottom would get transferred over to the reimbursement request form. This is identifying staff by name option. This is and then it should automatically calculate if you put in your rate on on this particular line. It should automatically calculate at the bottom your total amount. If it doesn't, you can have me help you, or you can create your, you can do that if you need help on that on your form. Getting your sheets together. These are your time sheets. Whatever you use, everybody has different ones. But please note that if you have hidden formulas or cells or lines or rows in your timesheets that you send us, we can't see those. Sometimes they're protected. Sometimes we don't even know they're there. So please make sure that everything that you send us it's easy and clear to figure out how you got the totals that you have on your on the personnel sheet before, and that it matches what you send us in your hard copy version. And if you need to create one more table that tallies it all up, then take the extra time to give us one more table that gives all those totals. But being ambiguous on these makes it really hard. And then we get the call from finance that says, hey, we can't figure out how you got these numbers. So we have to go through it yet again, which delays that payment that all of you are waiting for. So the next one here is your benefits. Again, everyone has different calculations for benefits. It's always different. So just be really clear with how you're getting your benefits. How you're calculating what your fringe benefits are by employee. Yes.
And I'll just add here that this is not required. Actually, we have very few grantees that do bring in their fringe benefits, but when they do, we will get forms that are sometimes literally a scratch of paper that says benefits at 16%. It's like, this is why we're talking about supporting documentation.
Yes. If you have consultants or contractors, we'll need a copy of the invoice. Here's a couple samples of some invoices that have been submitted, and these are fine. We really wanted to be clear on that the work was done, since this is a reimbursement grant, that it was done within the quarter, not, if this is a quarter that ended in December 31st, we would not be able to pay for work that was done on January 1st. We can only reimburse what was done within that quarter. If you somehow neglected to submit, or if you're putting only one request in for multiple quarters, because however your timing went on this, be sure that it says on your forms the amount of time that you're covering in your reimbursement request. These should not be super complicated, and I do not need to see the canceled check. I don't need to see the receipt from them. I just need an invoice that shows what you paid. This is not an audit. This is a reimbursement request. But you will need those things if you are ever audited. So, keep them on your end. But we just need one form of documentation for each of your items. This is the reimbursement form that is the Excel spreadsheet with the tabs across the bottom. They're a little different for for the grants, and we've gotten better and better. But the numbers in red, I don't want you to change those numbers. We don't want you to change those numbers. That's your budget that was approved of when you signed your contract. If there's any adjustments to your budget, they'll be done by us, and we'll send it back to you. And I actually, if there were any, let me see, the next one go in more. I have to look at what this one is. Yes. So here's what one looks like when it's done. Looks like I completed this one there on the top. You've got your quarterly costs for each of the categories. Remember that contractors go under the personnel line. If you hired a teacher or an educator, that goes under the personnel line, even though they are providing an educational service to you. There's going to be a balance line, and that's going to be what you have left in the grant, and that's circled right over here. So this is a good way for you to see how you're spending in each of the categories. This number at the bottom, which is your current request, this should be the same number that's going to show on the next page on your receipt request, as well as on your quarterly report under your current expenses. This number should match everywhere. I use these check boxes. I get to do these for CAL FIRE on a quarterly basis for each of the grants, and includes all the information you give to me. And I use these check boxes to show that everything matches and I have the backup. Same here with your match. Everything you write down here, you should have backup for on your receipt form and with your report. This is the sample of our receipt reporting form. This is an Excel form, and you have control. We haven't put any protections on these. If you need to add lines, if you need to put this in a different program, it doesn't matter. We just want to make sure you have these each of these categories in there. And the new version you have does have each of these totaled by category, so that you can make sure that this personnel number here on this line matches the personnel number that you have on your reimbursement request. And that should be for each of these categories. Environmental education materials does not include personnel costs. This is one of our most common issues, is people putting personnel costs into equipment or into environmental education or even into admin. Personnel time, anything that involves people's work goes under personnel. There is we have added volunteers to the bottom of this form. It wasn't on there and people were neglecting to report their volunteer hours. This will just help you with your total at the bottom. If you just add a line down here that says volunteers and write that total matching amount here, then your bottom numbers will match exactly what is on your reimbursement form. Acknowledgements. I think one of the areas where people have not been following their contract is on their signage. And actually some groups haven't even spent the money that they requested in signage on an ongoing basis. But that's a part of this grant, is that our grantees do acknowledge where the funds came from. And you can be unique. I know I visited EcoSlow, and they do little signs on each of their trees that shows where they got it. And when I visited in Santa Maria, growing your children's trees, they use a very nice mesh banner that they put on the chain link fence at the schools with zip lines, and they put those up. So there's different, and then here in Sacramento, Green Tech has these really nice signs in their park. So the range is there, but you are required to have some sort of signage, and it's a nice thing to include in your report when you get it placed, to have that as one of the photos in your hard copy report, so that CAL FIRE can see that is occurring.
And I'll just note that obviously the signs are really important, but in the grant agreement, there's a part about acknowledgement. And so it's really across the board on door hangers, publications, flyers. This is stuff that CAL FIRE has talked to us about in terms of not seeing it with some of the subgrantees. So we are going to be making an extra effort to ensure that this is being more fully integrated into the things that are you're producing that are being supported by this grant. And then the other thing that you'll notice here that we've really tried to highlight is that we fully recognize these are your projects. Yes, we are funding them and we're providing technical assistance, and our funding is coming from the state. But first and foremost, this is your project, and as a consequence, we really want your partners and your organization to be highlighted first and foremost. I just looked at a template that a group provided to me in Northern California that I actually sent back to them, and I said, can you put all your data first? Because the first things they listed on the sign, which is going to be permanently placed in the park, was CAL FIRE and Air Resources Board and Relief, and it really neglected to focus on the fact that the community partners were the one driving the project. So just put your logos first. This is not an ego boost for us.
Oh yeah, here's some examples of some of the publications and the documentation that they exhibit. We have Sustainable Claremont, Cal State Northridge, and Episcopal Impact Fund. The receipt reporting form, as I mentioned before, we really want to know this by vendor, not by item. And I think this was unclear somehow at the get-go of our grant program, but it is much easier for us to go and verify where you got your numbers if we know which receipt it's on. So, and then numbering. I know along the side here we have invoice numbering. Lost the mouse somehow. But anyway, across the left there it is. The left column here, if you number this, this is here Home Depot is receipt 4, and you write the 4 on it. We were really clear on where you got that particular number. And also, if there are multiple things on that Home Depot and you are only, billing us for the 203, make sure you write the 203 and perhaps circle the items on the receipt or highlight them that you're billing to, so we don't have to do a lot of investigative work. And again, if we have to do investigative work, they're going to be doing that at CAL FIRE, and they're going to be doing it at finance, which further delays our request. We've had things come back for like 40 cents difference. So they go through it a little bit with a fine-tooth comb. I don't know why I can't. There it is. I'm having mouse issues. Mice issues. I don't know. Indirect costs. We do not need those receipts. Do not include your receipts if you're incorporating a particular cost into your indirect percentage. And if you ask for indirect, you should bill us for it. It gets really complicated when it's not consistent. If you ask for 5% and you forget one time, and then the next time you try we have to submit some kind of documentation to CAL FIRE as to why you've asked for more in a particular month.
And then I'll just add here that a question that I'll get with some frequency is, I'd really like to buy promotional items for the volunteers. I want to get, do a pizza lunch for everyone. And this is the same answer that I give to everyone, is that those costs cannot be reimbursed as direct costs. But you do have an indirect cost pot, and we don't care how you use it. And some of our partners in the urban forestry community actually fought really hard to make sure that that indirect cost line item was built into the grants with CAL FIRE several years ago so that there would be a small discretionary pot. So that's why we don't seek researches, because we don't care how you're using the funds. And if that's a way that you can cover some of these things that cannot be covered with direct costs, go for it.
Mileage reimbursement. This is if you're planning to get reimbursed for mileage under the admin portion, not indirect. It's a direct administrative cost for running your grant. You cannot do mileage and gas. It is one or the other. And you can't do wear and tear in your car. That's what mileage is. So here is a sample of a mileage reimbursement form where you're writing down the miles covered, the date, which is really important because again, it needs to be within that reimbursement period you're applying for. And you use the reimbursement rate, which was in the quarter that you drove. So the mileage rate went up on January 1st, so you couldn't go back into December and use the higher rate. You need to use the rate that was in effect at the time of the travel. We had to go back and adjust some of our grantees on that in our December reports. And then this number you would transfer as mileage over onto your reimbursement form. Volunteer tracking, most of the match that we turn into CAL FIRE for all of our grants has to do with community support and activism, which shows in our volunteer donations of time to our projects. So we need to make sure that every time you have volunteers working that you keep track of those and that you report them as match and that you have the proper information on those. And how much information do we need on the volunteer forms?
We have a sample form coming up, but I think another point that we want to make here that I think some of the grantees have struggled with a little bit is what counts as volunteer. And in a grant like this, where you have an education component, where you've got community planning, where you've got obviously planting, and then you're doing workshops, almost everything counts. And in full disclosure, California ReLeaf is the official volunteer coordinator for the state of California on urban forestry. So this is a big focal point for us, is seeing what kind of volunteer engagement is coming from the projects. That's why in the application, we explicitly say that we're fine if all of your match is coming from volunteers. So that's why you see we say keep tracking volunteer sheets with you where you may want to go. If you're going to have an impromptu community planning meeting, or you're going to a meeting with the board and this is going to be a focal point of the discussion, then just pass the sheet around, and that counts towards your volunteers. And then even if this is something that's happened with some grantees recently, is that even if you've gone past your match requirement on volunteers, it does not hurt your application at all. It only helps your project if you're showing that you've gone way past what you required in terms of match, because it's demonstrating to the state the local commitment to make your project happen. So just some things to think about. But we do have a sample form next.
Okay. Yep, here's a sample form. So again, making sure that the date of the event is clear and that it matches with the quarter that you're submitting your report for. And we do need to know at the most the zip code of where they reside. So people are for privacy issues don't necessarily want to have an address, but if you can have a city and zip code, that's awesome. And here's just one that's filled out, and you can, because this one you can put your logo on these things. These are, here's case, Cal State Northridge did theirs. Did you want to say more about that?
No, I think this is fine. And you'll see up at the beginning, the only problem with this one was that the start and stop time was missing. Oh. And so I think when you go to the next slide, you'll see that it's a more completed form. You'll see. Okay. Pomona, they put their logo up there. They had a start time, they had a stop time. You see there's the city and the zip code, which is the minimum information you're looking for. Some people wanted to put in their email. You can create whatever form works best for you. And we also know that groups have liability waivers. We don't need to see those. If that's your only proof of volunteer engagement, send us a couple examples so we can have it in our hard copy. But I just finished a report in January where the grantee had 300 waiver forms. We don't need 300 waiver forms. If you can capture it in a sheet like this, that's great. I know we have a couple groups that actually will do a little Excel database and then provide some samples of those waivers. Anything like that, it's much like your own timesheets. We will accept it as long as it's got that minimum data.
Yes, 2 hard copies on by the 10th of each quarter. And this is if you want to get reimbursed, you gotta turn in that reimbursement form. We keep one of those copies, and we send 1 copy on to Cal Fire. I don't know if you put it in here, but oh yeah, here the second one is one of those copies you send us. Please send it single-sided. Cal Fire will only take single-sided paperwork. So if you send us 2 that are double-sided, we end up having to copy it and make it single-sided. So the one for the second copy can easily be double-sided. We are fine with that here, and in fact, it makes our filing a lot easier. And incomplete electronic submissions. I mean, your hard copies are probably incorrect as well. So if you, just really keep your receipts in order and keep organized, and it'll make your report a lot easier. I am going to say one thing that Chuck said at the beginning, and is too much as opposed to too little. We have the extremes, but don't think that because you send us every single thing and lots of copies, that makes it easier for us. It makes it harder. We have to wade through it all to find the exact number that we need that matches your form. So keep it simple. Keep it simple. And let's see.
Okay, so this is a process for a lot of people that are on the call today. You haven't even submitted a quarterly report, and some of you have only submitted 1 or 2. For the forced for the forced improvement people, you're actually on your very last report. You'll have your report is due April 10th, just like the urban forest management folks. The big difference is that after that, you only have a final report due. The urban forest management people, you're obviously in the long haul till December 2021. So this is a learning process. We know mistakes will be made, and our goal is to get those mistakes addressed and provide the technical assistance to correct for that as early as possible. So this is to become a smooth process where we're able to turn our stuff into Cal Fire well ahead of the scheduled, April 30th in this case, so that we can get those reimbursements to you as quickly as possible. Always feel free to submit materials a little bit early. If they come in 2 weeks early or even 10 days early, realistically, we're probably not going to look at them until about a week before, but it's fine if you want to include them early. I mean, it works for us to be able to look at one and be able to check it off the list and say, okay, this one's done. If you are submitting early, send the hard copy early too, though, because that's actually what we key off of, just because it's easier to spread that out over a table than to keep bouncing back and forth between electronic documents. Use this as a resource. Colleen, to her credit, is very generous with her time and being able to help guide people through how to use a Commander Compass or how to track their trees. So I will connect you to her if that's something you need help on. Amelia has become more fully integrated into this process as well. She's a resource. She's also a certified arborist. So if you want guidance on species selection, what may work in a certain geography, both Colleen and Amelia can help you there. And then I'm available to talk to you about budget change proposals, about how to complete your forms, anything that we've discussed in this webinar that you may be unclear about. Feel free to contact me. I actually respond better to phone. I'm old, so I'm old school in that regard, but I will respond to email as well. I'm not that great with text. Let's see, consult with fellow grantees. I mean, there is a lot of additional knowledge on this call. People that have done grants with us for several years, people that have only done grants with us for the one that they received in 2017, but it kind of nailed it out of the gate. So we can also connect you to other grantees if you have concerns there. And I said this at the very beginning, is that the reason we're providing this webinar and the kind of level of detail that we are doing is that we don't want you to get bogged down in the paperwork. We know the focal point should be the work that you're doing out in the field, educating groups about or educating your community about the value of urban forestry, getting those trees in the ground, the associated understory. And we don't want this to be something that becomes a burden for your organization. That's our job. So we want you to be able to do the good work you're doing. So if you have questions, feel free to contact us, but don't let this paperwork overshadow the great work on the ground. And then I think Amelia has a final comment.
I did have one on the payments, because I know there was a question earlier about the payments, and I think Chuck went through, and I've been trying to explain to you how it goes to CAL FIRE and then to finance, and then they cut us a check. So it's up. We have, if you have a hardship and you paid for a lot of stuff on your credit card, and 90 days, it's going to accrue some fees on your credit card. We have been able to do some partial payments for groups. I think especially for those groups that had extremely high requests, we had some up to 36,000. There was a request amount, and you think about a small nonprofit, that's a big amount. So we were able to do some partials, and we kind of look at the full slate and deal some of that money out. So if you are having a hardship on those, we'll try to accommodate those. But we cannot fast track, a particular payment when we don't have a full payment when we don't have the money in our bank account to cover them.
So I think at that, you want to do the last slide.
Oh, last slide. Yes, I can, and I can't. Do we have questions?
Yeah. So I believe we are right at 75 minutes. So we will take a couple questions if they come in. In full disclosure, it is a little hard for us to see questions on this side. Kalaine, if you're seeing questions on your end, feel free to yell out a question.
I see one. I got one.
Okay, go ahead.
Is it okay to bill for trees purchased in one pay period that we're holding for planting in the next quarter?
That is a fine line. It really is. I mean, the one thing I would say on that is that if you're doing your event April 5th and you bought the trees on May 31st or March 31st, yeah, I think that's fine. I think you can justify that, and you just put it in your progress report that we bought the trees right before the next quarter started, because that made sense for billing purposes and for invoicing purposes. If you're doing a planting in May and you bought the trees 2 weeks ago, that's not as good. That's a tougher sell. So
and particularly we had an issue already with someone who pre-bought, and then they tried to keep them alive over the summer, and that did not work. So that's a scenario where you are putting a lot of the liability on your ability to care for the trees in the containers through the hottest time of year, and that's not a good model to follow.
But it looks like in this particular case, someone's talking about holding them in their nursery. Holding them in your nursery for a few weeks can still lead to challenges. I think Amelia just raised one of them. I would say if you're going to be doing the tree purchase and billing for that in one quarter, knowing they're going to be planting in the next quarter, try to minimize that gap as best as possible, and we'll do our best to work with you. Okay, Kalaine, looks like we have a question on some photos. Can you field that one, or can you read it back?
There's a question. Do you have samples of photos, ideas, material used for signs by other partners?
Yeah, actually, we had that on the webinar.
I think that question came up before before you got there. So.
Okay, great.
Because then there's a lot of thanks. Thank you. Especially thanks for help on the indirect costs. Here's a question about the volunteer rate for California. Recall it having been $29, but has it changed?
Yeah, I think it's actually close to $30. I think it's $29.95 now, so it does adjust up each year. We get our information from a site that we rely on that CAL FIRE recognizes, and I want to say that when I went there recently, it was $29.95.
That is all I'm seeing as far as questions go.
And Kalaine, do you have any final comments?
I don't. Just everybody Oh, I do. It's best if you don't wait. Chuck mentioned this quickly, but it's best if you don't wait until the last minute to submit your report, because then I can help you. By the time the reports start rolling in, I'm drowning in DHG calculations, and it's a lot harder for me to find the time to help you figure out how to do it. So ideally, especially about mapping the trees, just map them while you're planting them, or when you get back from the field while it's all fresh in your mind. And that means when you have trouble, I have more time to help you.
So folks, I realize we went over by about 5 minutes. I apologize for that, but thank you for sticking with us. We really appreciate your time today on this call. And again, use this as a resource. You've got my information, and I can certainly connect you to Amelia or Colleen as needed. And go out, plant, and enjoy your spring. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.